the shadow in the pines. The wind was cold that October evening, carrying with it the damp, earthy smell of decaying leaves. Jason and Emily had heard the warnings for years. Their grandparents often told tales of strange happenings in the woods behind their old farmhouse, stories meant to frighten children into behaving. But at 17, Jason was far beyond believing in ghost stories, and his 14-year-old sister Emily followed his lead, eager to prove she wasn't just a kid anymore. "Grandma's just trying to scare us," Jason said as they crept through the backyard, flashlights bobbing ahead of them. The forest loomed in the distance, dark and foreboding. "All that stuff about the shadow, it's just old folks' nonsense." "Yeah," but Emily hesitated, hugging her arms against the chilly air. "Why do they never go in there? Not even during the day?" Jason rolled his eyes. "Because they're old. Probably afraid of tripping over a root or something. Come on, don't wimp out now." The truth was, Jason wasn't as fearless as he let on. Something about the woods unsettled him, though he couldn't say why. Maybe it was the way the trees seemed to huddle together, their twisted branches blotting out the sky. Or maybe it was the stories, whispered warnings about the shadow, a creature that watched and waited in the darkness, snatching up those who ventured too far. But those were just stories, and Jason was determined to prove it. The siblings crossed the backyard, the farmhouse's warm lights fading behind them. As they entered the woods, the air grew colder, the sounds of the outside world muffled by the thick canopy of leaves. The trail was barely visible, overgrown and littered with fallen branches. Jason led the way, his flashlight carving a narrow path through the shadows. Emily stayed close behind him, her unease growing with every step. "Maybe we shouldn't go too far," she said. "It's getting dark." "That's the whole point," Jason replied, his voice tinged with impatience. "We'll go to the clearing, take a picture to prove we were here, and head back. 5 minutes tops." But 5 minutes turned into 10, then 20, as the trail twisted deeper into the woods. The trees grew taller and denser, their gnarled trunks leaning inward like silent sentinels. The air was heavy with the smell of damp earth and something else, something faintly metallic. "Jason," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "Do you hear that?" He stopped, shining his flashlight around them. The beam caught only the endless rows of trees, their bark rough and peeling. "Hear what?" She hesitated. "It's like clicking, really faint, like it's far away." Jason strained his ears, but all he heard was the rustling of leaves in the wind. "You're imagining things," he said, though his own heart was racing. "Let's keep moving." As they walked, the clicking sound grew louder, though it seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Emily clutched Jason's arm, her fear palpable. What if Grandma was right? What if there really is something out here? Jason forced a laugh. "Seriously? You think there's a monster waiting in the woods to eat us? Come on, Em. That's kid stuff." But even as he spoke, a chill ran down his spine. The flashlight flickered, its beam sputtering like a dying candle. Jason smacked it against his palm, and the light steadied, but the momentary darkness had shaken him. He glanced back at Emily, her wide eyes reflecting the weak glow of his flashlight. Then she froze, her gaze locked on something behind him. "Jason," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "There's something there." He turned slowly, the flashlight shaking in his hand. At first he saw nothing, just shadows and trees. But then, 2 glowing pinpricks of light appeared in the distance. Eyes. They were too high off the ground to belong to any animal he knew, and they seemed to hover, unblinking, in the darkness. "Run," Jason said, his voice low and urgent. He grabbed Emily's hand, pulling her back toward the trail. The glow followed, bobbing and swaying as if the creature were gliding through the trees. The clicking sound grew louder, more insistent, accompanied by a low, guttural growl that vibrated in Jason's chest. They ran blindly, their footsteps pounding against the uneven ground. Branches tore at their clothes and skin, but they didn't stop. The forest seemed endless, the trail a cruel labyrinth that twisted and turned without leading anywhere. Emily stumbled, crying out as she fell to her knees. Jason skidded to a stop, helping her up. "Come on, we have to keep moving." But before they could run, the creature emerged from the shadows. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its limbs were wrong. Too long and too thin, like a spider's legs. Its skin was gray and mottled, stretched tightly over a skeletal frame. The head was the worst, an elongated skull, with no discernible features except for those glowing eyes and a mouth that stretched too wide, filled with jagged, mismatched teeth. The creature let out a sound, a mix of a hiss and a growl, and lunged toward them. Jason pushed Emily ahead of him, shouting for her to run. He turned, throwing his flashlight at the thing. It struck the creature's chest, but did nothing to slow it down. They ran again, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The farmhouse's lights were still nowhere in sight, and Jason's legs burned with exhaustion. Emily sobbed beside him, her fear a tangible weight that pressed down on both of them. "Jason," she cried, "I can't. Don't stop," he yelled, grabbing her arm. "We're almost there." But they weren't. The trail ended abruptly, giving way to a thicket of thorny bushes. Jason spun around, searching for another path, but the creature was already there, its glowing eyes staring at him from the darkness. Emily screamed as it lunged toward her, its claws slicing through the air. Jason grabbed a branch from the ground, swinging it wildly, but the creature swatted it away with ease. Its focus was on Emily, its jaws opening wide as it moved closer. "Hey!" Jason shouted, his voice breaking. "Over here!" The creature hesitated, its head tilting unnaturally as it turned its gaze to him. For a moment, the forest was silent, the tension so thick it was suffocating. Then the creature stepped back into the shadows, its eyes the last thing to disappear. Jason turned to Emily, but she was gone. He searched for hours, screaming her name until his throat was raw, but there was no trace of her. When he finally stumbled back to the farmhouse, his clothes torn and his face pale, his grandparents didn't ask where Emily was. They only nodded, their expressions grim. "The shadow doesn't let go," his grandmother said softly, staring out the window at the dark woods. "We told you not to go." Jason never set foot in those woods again, but sometimes, late at night, he would wake to the sound of Emily's voice calling to him, faint and desperate, from the trees, and when he looked outside, he would see two glowing eyes watching him from the edge of the forest.